All right, so we should be going live here on Do the Work, and hopefully Mark Russell will join us here in a few moments. We've had some technical difficulties today trying to get a hold of our different typical options, and maybe having issues here before long, so we'll see. Trying to get in and get a discussion going today, and hopefully things are going okay, and we'll see how that works out. Seems like we've had all kinds of technical issues this morning, so if you're watching and you're having any technical issues with us, just put in the comments section so I can know that something's froze up or something's going wrong. I see Hal's watching. Hal, something's going on. Let me know that maybe we can correct that. So we're waiting for Mark Russell to join us, and as soon as he does that, hopefully we can get him added in. For those who don't know Mark's a good buddy of mine from Valparaiso, Indiana. He's originally from Danville, Kentucky, and he is a fantastic guy who has preached at the Vale Church of Christ in Valparaiso for over 30 years. And that's a remarkable attribute, something that I find very admirable, and from that standpoint. And so from that idea, we want to kind of tap into Mark's experience, into his mindset and his time of 31 years. There's not a lot of guys I know. There's some out there, but it seems to be a rarity for a congregation and a preacher to have this kind of stability and longevity, and so we want to kind of get with him on that. So again, we're waiting for Mark to join the broadcast, and I'm just, by the way, I don't have 31 years experience anywhere. The most I have is 11. I find that interesting. If you're watching, listening, and maybe you have that kind of experience that Mark does, and there he is, we'll get him added in. Add into your comments along the way. And what we'd like to do is, if you have questions for Mark specifically about how to make things work in that sense, that would be great as well. All right, Mark, it did not add you. This just seems to be the kind of, there we go. Finally. Can you hear me? Are you good?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
I can. I will say that we fill up a screen.
Yes, we do. We are 2 tons of fun on Facebook Live.
We are 2 tons of fun on Facebook Live. And it's I wanted to get this broadcast in before basketball season started, because that affects our relationship dramatically. So and not only that, but before the Kentucky-Tennessee game. So
yeah, that would be even more. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Mark is a Big Blue Nation, Blue Mister. It's when his reality is confused and he no longer believes in absolute truth. But we digress. So Mark,
I'm just leaving that alone. I'm just leaving it alone.
And it looks like, I tell you, we're having all kinds of difficulty. At least my computer is today. It says that it's not working again. So hopefully you and I are live, and it's just my laptop having tremendous issues today, which would not surprise me. So as we get into today, you've been at the Vale Church of Christ in Valparaiso, Indiana for 31 years, correct?
That is correct.
And
honestly, when you put it that way, it's a little disconcerting, because, as you age, your brain really doesn't age, but your body gives you hints. It just doesn't seem right that I have been in Valparaiso longer than anywhere else.
Yeah.
And it's kind of surreal.
In fact, you've lived in Valparaiso longer now at this point than you lived anywhere in your life.
Yes. I've been in Indiana longer than I was ever in Kentucky, which, again, is hard to wrap my mind around.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, you're from Danville, Kentucky, and then you went to Western Kentucky,
Yes.
And you got your degree at Western in?
Majored in history, minored in math, and got a high school teaching degree. That was my aim. It was not my aim going to school to be a preacher.
Okay. So how in the world does this happen?
Well, during college, I did 2 summers of intern work with Steve Wolfgang in the church in Danville. I actually went to a country church, the Sycamore Church, out in the southwestern part of Boyle County. Lived in Danville, but never worshiped at that church. My grandfather, after he was widowed, went there, and I kind of had it in. He became an elder, and so, I had it in there. But I worked 2 summers with Wolfgang, and Steve was a great mentor and still is, to be honest with you. And so when in the process of my education, I thought I wanted to be a teacher. It's what my family has done. There are 4 generations of teachers in my family and also in my wife's family, for that matter. And
actually, there's 5 now, right? Or are you including the boys now?
I'm including the boys. Okay. I would have been the third. My sister and I would have been the third. Would be the third. And so I got to the point that, I called Mom one day. I think it was in the middle of my junior year, and I said, "Mom, is it okay if I just preach?" And she, until she passed away, she reminded me, just being a preacher. Nice, Mark. And so I ended up working in retail, and I eventually tried out at a couple of different places. I actually tried out in northern Alabama the week after I came to Valparaiso to try out. And that was in August of 1988. And, from August 88, here I am.
Yeah. So let's get into that, because I think that's interesting to kind of see. Here you are. Okay. So here you are. How in the world does a guy from Danville stay essentially the southeast side of Chicago? I mean, for those who don't know, Valparaiso, Indiana is, how far are you from Chicago? You're not far.
It's 45 miles. You can be in the loop in less than an hour, easy.
Okay. So essentially a bedroom community of Chicago to some degree. Yes. A lot of people drive to Chicago to work.
Absolutely.
For those who didn't know, my family's from the Gary, Indiana, which is real close by there. I had family that lived near Valpo out in the Four Lakes area. You and I have talked about that, and or Four Seasons area. So I'm familiar with that area. But how's a guy from Danville, Kentucky, never intended to preach, moved to Valparaiso, Indiana, the Vale Church, and still there 31 years later? What was it about that church, even from the beginning, that kind of set you up for this kind of longevity and stability?
When you called me and texted me, and we've talked about this, I've been trying to wrap my mind around it, Terry. And what I can tell you from the beginning was I tried out at a place near Guntersville, Alabama. Small church, struggling, had a couple of good families. And then when we came up here and tried out, the vibe was just different. There was a vision more than just help my kids be faithful. And from the beginning, the people here, the Hewitt family and the Lovell family, and would have been the main patriarchs, if you will, of the church at that time. They said, we want somebody to come here and to be here. One of the things about Northwest Indiana and the Chicago region, unless your name is Diesel Camp, shout out to the Diesel Camps.
Or Diesel Camp, depending on your...
Or Diesel Camp, yeah, depending on which one. Is a lot of folks came up here to preach, but then they left.
Right.
The Hillbilly Highway came up here for jobs. And a lot of folks came up here for the jobs and then left immediately. They never made it home. And that was one of the things that the people here really wanted. They wanted somebody to just come and be at home here and do work here, ought to have a webpage, and, just be a part. And I didn't have any other history. I knew that that's what Wolfgang did. Wolfgang was at the Danville Church for over 25 years. And so that wasn't odd. But it also helps that I love it. I love the region. I love the area. I love being close to Chicago.
Big Cubs fan.
Pardon?
Big Cubs fan.
No. White Sox fan. White Sox fan.
Yeah,
absolutely. But anyway, and so it just it just clicked. I don't know any other real way. I didn't have a history. I was young and impressionable, and my wife has been such a stable part of this. I don't know that she gets as much credit in all of this. And I don't know if you've had a segment on preachers' wives and how important they can be. I mean, there are too many expectations sometimes, and you could talk about that too. But she's been such a stabilizing force. And I feel like I'm rambling here because I don't know if there is a golden ticket other than we wanted to get along. We came and made it our home. I even bought a snow rake. You and I have talked about the snow rake. I have to rake my roof from the snow every once in a while. But that's how it worked.
Right. And so tell people about the church when you moved there versus what Vale is like now. Over the 31 years, how has it changed? Because I think that's an interesting part as well to kind of think about. And I know some of that story, but not everybody knows Mark Russell. So
they might be the lesser after they know more today. When I first moved here, the church was about 30 people. There was a large institutional group on the other side of town, and we were meeting in the bottom of a podiatrist's office.
Okay.
They had already purchased some land to build a building. That was the intent. Of course, I had to bring support with me, and I'd like to shout out to the East Side Church in Bowling Green, Kirkwood Church in St. Louis, and the Jackson Heights Church in Columbia, another family connection. There were a lot of folks who were intent on helping, and they did, but it was a small group, but they had a vision. The family, the Hewitt family especially, they had a vision of where they wanted, how they wanted to go about it. Bob Hewitt, who was the older of the Hewitt family, he had just retired, and he had been an elder at the Downers Grove Church, but had moved out here, and there was no sound church. And so we hung up a shingle, as it were, and we didn't try to fight. We didn't try to get involved with a lot of stuff. We just minded our own business, tried to preach the truth and be good examples. Now, over the course of time, what ended up happening is that larger church imploded on itself. There were some really liberal folks who wanted women's preachers and who wanted to probably think about instrumental music and just go and go and go far and wide. And we ended up getting what I've always said were the Bible believers. Mm-hmm. And so after about 5 or 10 years, we were at about 70 or 80. There was no huge event. I mean, there were Bible studies, there was evangelism, there were baptisms, but we were just a little light blue sided church on the east side of town.
Right.
And over the years, what we've done is we've just minded our own business, tried to do our own thing. We weren't trying to fight any windmills. We didn't go out and try to kill the dragon or anything, as it were. Just try to live a quiet and peaceable life and be who our God wanted us to be. Right. And now, for better or worse, if it means anything, and it really doesn't, that's one of my pet peeves, is everybody always asks, how many are going there and what's your contribution? Right. But we have about 135, 140 people, and I serve as one of the elders. And still, 31 years later, I don't know how that. It's I have to just tell you straight up, this biographical stuff is really disconcerting. I got asked to do that one time for a lectureship, and I'm like, for a fellow who gets up in front of people and talks a lot, this talking about myself stuff is kind of.
I'm not really good at this. Yeah. Well, let's talk about then. I know, how long have you been an elder there? Because that's I think that happened since we've been friends.
Yeah, it's about 7.5, 8 years.
Okay. So let's talk about that a little bit more. I mean, that adds another layer to your work. Of course, having 31 years there, you've really got a lot of opportunity there with experience. So how's that changed your work? That's not something we really put in there, but how's that changed your perspective of your work? I mean, I know you've grown and mature over the 31 years a lot, but how does that change your work when you add that other role?
Well, what was interesting is I had always thought that I wasn't getting a lot of feedback from the elders. You know, be careful what you ask for. But so I talked to one of them specifically. His name is Steve Hewitt. Wonderful, wonderful man. And I said, Steve, you know, one of the challenges, and I know we're going to get to this later. One of the challenges of being here so long is I don't want to be stale. I don't want to be redundant. I don't want to get in a rut. And I kind of felt that personally, and I went and I talked to Steve, and he says, Mark, he said, I don't need to think about it. What you need to do is you need to keep raising your kids here. You need to become an elder here. You and Cindy, we trust you. And I was just like, I was just hoping for some sermon topics, and he drops becoming an elder on me. And so I had been doing some things, one of the challenges when you've been around so long that I think has become a problem is sometimes folks feel more comfortable coming and talking to the preacher rather than the elders, despite the New Testament example.
Sure.
And so I was doing some shepherding anyway, even though, and honestly, when my name came up, when the elders said we would like you to consider it, one of my toughest questions came from my bride. Cindy said, do you know what you're getting into? And I said, no, I don't know what I'm getting into. I've never done this before. But
and there's a background there too, because I know Cindy's dad is an elder in Columbia, the Jackson Heights congregation. I know I know your father-in-law. I knew Cindy's grandmother. So we have some connections through all of that.
Right, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But how it changed, it probably made me even more thoughtful and become more careful in what I say. I've I can be bombastic. I can be kind of over the top probably too often, and becoming a shepherd made me want to be more careful. I mean, a preacher should always be careful, but even more careful because I felt like my words had more weight, even more now. But it almost, Terry, it seemed almost a natural progression. I'd been around for so long. It'd been 4 years, and it seemed like that the folks that I was talking to, and I was, it just seemed almost a natural progression.
Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about the challenges. 31 years. I think one of the remarkable things is 31 years is not something that goes by without obstacles, maybe is a good word, challenges, struggles. Right. And so maybe not specifics, maybe a couple specifics, but I think one of the greater things to talk about may be there's a real temptation for preachers and leadership that at the first sign of a struggle, or maybe it's not the first struggle, maybe it's the third struggle.
After the honeymoon's over.
Yeah, the honeymoon's over, and there's 2 little 3 nitpicky things, and those kind of build up. And somebody once kind of described that to me as the building of a wall, that they were that bricks were being added one at a time, and before you knew it, these 30 bricks built a wall up. Maybe talk about the challenges, but more importantly, how do you handle the challenges in such a way that you nor the leadership was ready to just run away from that? I mean, what's the secret sauce to that? Because there's a lot of us that don't endure those challenges. You're an anomaly. 31 years does not happen. And so how does that happen?
Well, there were challenges. The first challenge was I was 23 when I moved here. That was the first challenge. And then I turned 24 soon after. And the first challenge is, and a guy who wasn't trying to be thoughtful said, Mark, you're the most immature member here, and he was right. He wasn't trying to be nice about it, but trying to know my place when I first moved here and listening. But that didn't always happen. But a blessing and a challenge is when we got elders, and we got elders really quick. It was less than 3 years, and we had shepherds here, and so, but they always had my back. And one of my first challenges was that it was my fault. I tried to do too much. I wanted to push the envelope. That's kind of a personality plus and minus, blessing and curse that I have, because I want to go.
That we have. That we have.
Well, I didn't want to lump you in with me, as you know. Well, anyway, and so one of the early issues was the former preacher who stopped preaching was still here, and he was leaning left and being sort of modern in some of his thought processes, and he eventually left. And that was a little bit of a challenge, because I felt inferior because I was in knowledge and maturity. But the blessing is that folks had my back. And other challenges, I guess most of my challenges, Terry, have been personal. Being content to just do the work, not trying to push too hard, not trying to always be cool. You know, there's been a challenge of a couple of congregations, 3 or 4 congregations have called and asked me to move, and you know, sometimes the grass is greener, sometimes the money is more. There have been a couple of challenges like that. But
so why didn't you, when you had those opportunities where, let's just be honest, maybe it looks like the grass is greener, looks like the opportunity's better, and we've all had those experiences, and you and I talked about those. And I mean, I've had similar experiences. I know my reasons for not moving a lot of those times, but why didn't you move when you had those opportunities?
Well, the first reason is I never wanted to be the guy to be 3 and up. I never wanted to be, 3 years. And all credit to many, many, many churches who got rid of their parsonages, so so it wasn't a turnstile preacher. It just wasn't. It wasn't time yet, either for me, for my wife, for my boys. It wasn't time yet, and I said no too quick one time without talking to Cindy, and she said, "Why did you say no so quick?" And I said, "Well, because it had been, the times before. There have been congregations in Tennessee and Kentucky that have been closer to family, closer to home. There's been a congregation on the Eastern Seaboard that called, and I'm like, there's not enough money that you could pay me." Because, yikes, I've been out there, and I love the folks out there, but it's like, that's a different country out there. But it just didn't fit right. It just wasn't right. And they also weren't kicking my tail out up here too. Sometimes necessity is the mother of invention. You got to find some place to go. But that has never been an issue. And one of the blessings with this group from the very beginning, I have had a written agreement, contract with the church. And one of the things is they said, look, if you want to leave, tell us. Just do the golden rule. Tell us what you're doing. Tell us why you want to go. And the only time that I ever considered it, Terry, was money, because my boys were getting ready to go into college, and college is not cheap.
Yeah.
But the congregation here met that need. And so there's never really been I've never tried out somewhere. And that was something that the congregation up here and the history of folks up here, a lot of times preachers would come up north and preach, and they would go back for vacation or to hold a gospel meeting when in fact it was a tryout.
Well, and so I know Valpo area, that area has been a resume builder for some people, unfortunately, is a good term for that. And I can tell you, I've not always handled that tryout situation the best way. I've gone on vacation and tried out before. But I also know that, and to the preachers out there, some of that depends on the transparency and the relationship of the elders.
Oh, yeah.
I've been in places, and you and I have talked about this, where I knew if I gone and tried out somewhere and it got back to the eldership, even if I didn't get that job, I was going to be jobless.
Right.
So it's a delicate balance, but you've always had that agreement, but there's also a spirit of, and I think that's one of the blessings from an outsider looking in. And full disclosure, I also have a relationship with the Hewitt family, a very personal relationship with them. I know what kind of people they are, and they're good people. They've been a big part of this. There's always been a good relationship. It's not been this adversarial. I think that the Vale Church has been a very good work because it's never been this micromanaged kind of hireling approach that we see common in a lot of areas. If you had been treated that way, do you think that would have been a lot harder to stay there for 31 years?
Well, if I'd have been treated like I know other folks have been treated, Terry, the hillbilly highway runs both ways.
Yeah.
But to see from the beginning and see that's one of the blessings how the relationship that I've had with the shepherds evolved. At first, I was protected. I was a Teflon guy. The elders said, "Look, if anything comes up, you let us be who we're supposed to be." But as I grew and I matured, hopefully, we became more co-workers. It was
a partnership.
Yeah, and it's always been a partnership. It's been a family where I was the younger brother, and then I was a brother, and I could, I could talk more freely and openly. And the leadership here has not just the Hewletts, but with Tim Anderson and Lyle Lovell, there's always been a good relationship and an open relationship, and folks just wanted to get along. Part of the makeup of this church is there's been a lot of heartache in the church in Northwest Indiana and the Chicagoland area. And I joke around, but it's partly true. I call us the Statue of Liberty Church. Give us your tired, your poor, your huddle masses longing to breathe free. We're not trying to build a wall. Oops, yeah, I went there. So
we made it 27 minutes without a reference.
Yeah. But the folks that have worshiped here for years want to be at peace, want to do the work of the Lord, want to find some places of encouragement, and and just trying to just simply be disciples.
Yeah. And I know one of the things
around to answer that question there.
No. I know one of the things that's kept me from leaving is that I have such relationships with the church family, and I think you're this way too. And I don't think congregations, and I think in some places elderships don't understand this. Preachers do. When we look at leaving a place, it's like going through a divorce for us. Like we're losing our family. I mean, one of the most painful things. And by the way, that's not a commentary about where you go to.
Right.
And so, for instance, in Chelsea, we have a great family here, and we love it here. But we really, in that transition, really were emotionally wounded by losing some relationships back in Memphis. And
Sure.
And it is like a divorce where you lose family members and you don't see them very often, and it's very hard. And that was one of the things, by the way, that kept me from leaving so many times was not just my relationship with other people there, but my family's relationship with other people. I mean, again, your boys have only known until they went to college and went off, and one of them didn't really leave. They've only known one church their entire life.
Right.
I mean, they visited at other family churches, but one main body that they were a part of their entire life until they moved away. And so it's a painful process. And as a parent, you got to take that into play, and you mentioned, and I do wonder this, was there ever a time that you can remember where maybe things were so tough that you thought maybe this is the time I need to leave? I mean, did you ever remember that thought of maybe, because there's times I got to say, and maybe, and I know from talking to other people, there's the same kind of language that there are times preachers say, or maybe their wives say, hey, maybe God's just trying to tell us it's time to go elsewhere. Maybe we're not the people for this job anymore. Do you ever have that experience?
The experience is that obviously not to the degree that others have had. My experiences at times was, am I being listened to? one of the standard things that I say up here is I never want to become Charlie Brown's school teacher. Wah, 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 wah. And being the main voice in Bible classes in the pulpit, that's a struggle. But know that, Cindy and I we've had some long talks. We've had conversations at different times. But the thing that we always wanted to do, if we could, God willing and the elders willing, was not move around so much, because moving, it would have been gutting to leave like Brian and Lena Glover, to leave folks that we have been so close to for so long. I've not had to experience that very often, but it's because of the blessings of the relationship. And the reason it hurts so much to leave is because you did it right. Because it's supposed to be a relationship.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, so my last work was 11 years, and I'm not going to get too much into the weeds on that, but there's part of us we didn't want to leave,
Right.
And that was gutting. That was hard. And those last 6 months we were there was to some degree brutal. And I can tell you this, I think that there's a key to that. And I also know there's some, and I've actually heard this third hand, so let me say that, so to be clear, but through some conversations with some people, we've heard some leadership don't want their preachers to be that close to the members, so that it is easier to make that change. And I would say to anybody who's involved in leadership, that's a really, really bad idea. And that's not only a bad idea, I think it's sinful. That's not what God intended. It's a hireling mentality.
I was just about to say that. And see, Terry, that's something I have never felt. I have never felt like a hireling. And to the credit of the congregation and the elders, that was from the beginning. That was something that has enabled this relationship to last this long. There's no other way around that. And engendering a hireling relationship, you and I have talked about this. There's so many books on it. It ought to be clear to folks that having a hireling and it's one thing to a mentor and a mentee, but to have almost I can get rid of you whenever I want to mentality, that type of power thing, it doesn't work well for preachers. It doesn't work well for elders. It doesn't work well for husbands, and it's unbiblical. Matthew chapter 20 says, my people don't lead like the world leads.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the challenges a little bit, and we talked about that. But what do you think the benefits are that that you have? And maybe we'll do this from two sides. First off, what do you think the benefits are for the longevity as a preacher? What are the benefits for you and your family to be somewhere for 31 years?
Building relationships, even in a community, having relationships in a school, being known as a preacher is a great door opener, and it's great for evangelism. There have been folks that have become Christians because we have been around so long. Hey, that's a Bible church over there. If you want to know what the Bible says, they take the Bible seriously. They do Bible things the Bible ways, which was one of the greatest compliments, from an outsider that we'd ever gotten. That type of just that stability, and to be able to develop relationships and to be able to be known as part of a community, that's so very important to be for the long term. Now, you can develop that quickly, and that's one of the blessings of having our kids in school here. We got to know teachers. We got to talk unashamedly about what we do. And there were some challenges along that line because it's a pretty religious community. But, being able just to a quiet and peaceable life, minding our own business, but doing the work. And I don't know that you can do that when you move every 3 years, every 4 years.
Yeah, it was interesting because I know that my first work was 6 years. It was 3.5 at the second work, and they were vastly different. One was rural, one was very urban, and that presented a lot of challenges. Then we moved to Memphis, which is also more urban, kind of a combination, but very small town community feel. And but it was something that became interesting to me was about my 5-year mark. About 4 or 5 years is when I was so ingrained in the community because of the schools and PTO and sports that I couldn't go anywhere without being noticed. Right. In a town of like 50,000 people. I couldn't go to Target without running into 2 or 3 families, or I couldn't. And I made the comment to Duane at that time. I said, I don't know how these preachers who used to move every 3 to 5 years were ever truly successful community-wise, evangelistically, because it takes about 3 to 5 years to even get your roots built enough so that you can have success from a community standpoint. And I think that's one of the downfalls of the kind of quickly moving. Now, again, I understand in a lot of those cases, it's not the preacher's decision.
Exactly.
And I know when I talk to churches that if I've ever run into that idea that some churches have this, we want to change every 5 years, you could take me out of the interview process because I'm not interested in coming. Right. And so I think from a preacher standpoint, even the ability to do your work in the way that you want to do it,
right.
that 5-year window has to be a minimal goal, because I think that's just when you really are able to even understand how to connect to your community.
Sure.
In that
well,
sense.
See, and that's something from the beginning, from the interview, from the conversations with the men, that's what maybe ill-fated Sunday afternoon in July back in '88, that they said, we want you to come and to make your home
here.
Yeah. And for better or worse, I mean, that's what they got. Now they, but now at 31 years, I will tell you a challenge now is, since our boys are adults and in their own houses, that has presented another challenge to, oh yeah, you're Mr. Russell's dad. You're Mr. Russell, to which, the gray hair is giving that away, but to still be in the community, to find opportunities to still be, and not just kind of rest on the laurels, not to just take it easy and kind of slide your way into, retirement or moving south now that you've put in your time up north. There are still challenges, and I want to tackle them. Cindy and I want to tackle them. We're probably busier now than we've ever been since I am an elder, and for some reason people still invite me for meetings 2 or 3 times a year. But that's and I want to be challenged. I don't want to get lazy.
Sure. What about the benefits for the church? What do you see as the benefits for the congregation to have a guy for that long? As you said, one of the challenges is become Charlie Brown's teacher if you're not careful.
Right.
You can get tuned out. And I think that's a requirement on you or me or whoever the preacher is to, well, for one thing, to not preach the same sermon every 5 years. I mean, that's one of the things that you guys need to avoid.
That would be helpful.
But to adapt and to change. And one of the things that's great is one of the things I respect about you is you try to stay current. I think that may become more. I wonder if that becomes more challenging when our kids leave home. I know with my daughter in high school, for instance, it's impossible for me not to stay current because I have to put up with that stuff all the time. But I can foresee that will be more of a struggle for me when all 3 kids are gone. I think you have a benefit. Both your boys teach. They teach in secondary education, I think, right? Isn't that what they do? So you have a connection through them and through things you can talk about with that. But so part of our issue is to stay current with the culture and society, not become the grumpy old man in the pulpit.
Which I am sometimes.
you are not. But what are the benefits? We know the challenges. What are the benefits to our congregation for a guy being there for 31 years?
Well, just biblically, there is a stability. It's the voice. I mean, if you're preaching right, it's not always hip and new. Sometimes it's the tried and true. You redig the wells, if you will, and you know what you can count on. I've been here long enough that I've seen folks who became Christians and have wandered away, but who have also come back. And that, because they know where home is. They know where the truth is. They know, they've they've tasted what the world has to offer, and they're like, no, that's not what I was expecting. At least that's what, but it's always hopeful, because there are prodigals out there who have gone away from the Lord and who need to come back home. But, the home, the relationship, that kind of stability, I don't think you can undersell that. That is a benefit, and it has nothing to do with me personally, even though I'm filling that role. This is what you could expect.
Yeah.
Here's how it's going to be, and that's been a theme through the eldership from before and even now. Here's what you can expect.
Yeah.
This is how it's going to go.
And we had a question from my buddy Hal that says, can you discuss the pastor mentality that comes with being in one location for a long time, particularly if and when the preacher becomes a shepherd, the perception that others have and your own mentality? So, and I think maybe the better question is, you can have a pastor mentality now because you are one. But before you were an elder, and let me maybe, well, I'll let you answer, then I'll add some commentary to that later. But how was that hard at some points? I mean, let's say, for instance, you were 20 years into, I know you've been there 20 years or longer before you were even appointed as an elder.
Right.
Close to 25. Was there a time period in that was difficult, or were you just blessed with a really good working relationship with really good shepherds that never became an issue, and it was never? Because I think one of the things about the pastor's mentality, and maybe this is where I'll add a little commentary, is what we commonly, and especially in the South, talk about the pastor mentality is that the preacher is running everything or has to have his hand in everything and feels like he has to control everything. I think that's born out of a lot of times, if I can just be frank, a lack of communication and a lack of partnership, where the preacher feels locked out. And because he feels locked out and he doesn't know what's going on, his reaction is to be somewhat controlling.
Right.
And which is not good. Did you ever feel that way? Was it ever a struggle at any point?
There may have been a certain situation or two that came up where folks would come to Cindy and me, or just to me, and talk about marriage problems. And I guess I didn't really have the struggle wasn't with the elders. It wasn't with the shepherds here. It was a fact that sometimes the Christians weren't using the shepherds like they should have. And I don't know why that they elevated them. Why we don't want to bother them, that sort of mentality. But there's always been this really good relationship, and there were times that I told people, I said, look, the elders have to know. You either tell them or I'm going to. This is not something that Mark needs to handle.
Right.
And I hate talking about myself in the third person like that. But I don't need to handle that. You need to let the shepherds know, and if you won't, I will. And that's not something. And I guess that's something, Terry, that I got in my mind a long time ago, is. And maybe it was to a couple of books like they smell like sheep, and having even though I could probably be a control freak, I don't think that benefits the kingdom any. I don't think it ever has.
Has there ever been, let me ask you this, because I've been in that situation, and especially through marriage counseling that Duane and I have done with people, obviously there gets a point where sin's involved in those kind of things, and you're like, hey, the elder's going to know this. If you don't tell them, I will. We've been in that situation as well. Have you ever had the situation where you knew some stuff that wasn't quite to that level, and the elders wanted you to tell them, and you were like, hey, guys, I have a confidence issue here that I can't do that you got to trust me that if you need to know something, I'll let you know. But otherwise, you've got to let me kind of make that decision. Did you ever have those situations come up?
Well, to a point. The elders didn't know about it.
Right.
And that kind of weight that I know, obviously more now becoming an elder, that was tough. I mean, there were a couple of situations I was just like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And see, and
some of those situations, by the way, are not sinful. To make clear.
Right.
It's I'm going to use this harsh but true term. It's stupidity that's involved usually, and you shake your head and you go, "Why in the world are you acting that way?"
Right.
I've had situations where other people kind of want to, they know that, and maybe I've even been asked by someone to meet with this person.
Right.
And I've had situations where somebody comes up and goes, well, how's it going? It's going good. Well, what can you tell me? Nothing.
Right.
Well, why not? Because there's nothing I can tell you. Like, and that's, again, I just wonder if you've ever been in that situation, but you said that the elders never kind of knew that.
Right.
And so one of those things is knowing when to say something and when to not.
Right.
But I do think you've had a special relationship with your elders that's allowed you to, you've not been kept in the dark about a lot of things.
No. There have been times that I didn't know and especially when I was younger, that I wanted to know. And now I would tell my younger self, just shut up and do your work, because that's
your first piece of advice to the 20-year-old preacher: shut up and do your work.
Right. Yeah, exactly. If I could write a letter to myself, Brad Paisley. But no, I've never really struggled with that, but I've known of other people who have had struggles at times. And I know my father-in-law has a guy that calls him trying to dig around for information and trying to figure out what's on. He's like, there are certain people here who have tried to dig around for information or, ask, well, some people are saying, I think every preacher has to deal with stuff like that, but I've never really had to deal with that. In dealing with the pastor mentality, I've never thought of myself, and I'm going to share the story that I told you about that you cackled at. Before I moved up here, my great aunt she lived right across the street from me, and she sat me down on her front porch and she says, Mark Russell, if you go up there and become some Baney Rooster, self-righteous preacher, I'm going to wear your tail out. And I try to remember that. And I also have a wife that if my head gets too big, even larger than it already is, that she would come up to me. She's like, what on earth are you doing? Which is a great blessing. And, and I get full of myself too often. And, I have to be brought back down to earth. But that's hopefully those issues have been few and far between.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think one of the secrets to that has been for you is and to be clear, I think you were blessed with a really rare opportunity.
Oh,
that even 30-year-old Mark Russell probably doesn't appreciate like he does today.
No. But there also has been good work that's been done, not by me, but this church has done good work. I've had a couple of summer interns through the years.
Yeah, I know.
And they say, well, I want a church like this. And I'm like, look here, Slick, this is a work, this has been 20 years in the making. These types of relationships and this type of work doesn't just happen because, hey, I want to find some place to move to like this.
Right.
Well, all relationships and good churches are works in progress. It's not like, hey, I want to hitch my wagon up there and then join in after most of the work is done.
Yeah. By the way, your mentor just joined, so be careful what you say.
Wolfgang's on? Oh, boy.
Wolfgang's on. So we need to close this out, especially since Wolfgang's listening at this point.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to get any more trouble I'm already going to be in.
Yeah, let's close out with maybe a few words for the younger guy that's in his first work. And let me say it this way. I'm gonna be a little bit bolder than you. There's guys right now that are at their own Valpo, their own Vale Church of Christ, that it is not the big attractive work that maybe they got into preaching for. Because when you went to Vale, it's not what it was today. It was smaller, and you've done a lot of work, and people there have done a lot of work, and you've been blessed. And part of that was a commitment. Part of that was a commitment to them. Part of that was their commitment to you. But to the guy that is going to be easily lured away by those phone calls that you've received, and if he's not careful, is going to buy into this, I'm a pulpit megastar mentality at 27 and I need to move on up. Or to that guy that views preaching as a corporate ladder kind of thing. What do you say to him today? And even to the guy that may be struggling with working with his eldership, what are some 2 or 3 things? I mean, earlier you said just shut up and do your work. You would tell yourself. That's probably a good place to start. But what are 2 or 3 things you would say to those younger guys about maybe hanging in there and making something work? Because if you had had that mentality like they did, you would not be at Vale. I mean, I think one of the things to say that you can't say is part of why this work is because Mark Russell has humility and a commitment to the work that some of us didn't have early on. So what would you say 2 or 3 things to the guys that maybe would encourage them to take this track rather than always looking for the greener grass?
Sure. Well, I looked for the greener grass. There were times because of frustrations early on in my immaturity. We had a meeting preacher, L.A. Stouffer was here, and like in my immaturity, I thought they're not listening to me. L.A. What do I do? I've tried to get people to have Bible studies with, and nobody's helping me, and it was a little bit of a pity party. And L.A. said, "Mark," he says, "what you do is do your work. If you don't have Bible studies, study yourself more, grow in your knowledge, challenge yourself." And don't always be looking to move as if that is that's going to answer your problems, because sometimes the problems look at you in the mirror in the morning. And LA didn't say that, but he got me back to the kind of just do what you're supposed to do. Because who knows, I don't know that was an Esther moment for me, but I wanted results. And if you base the evaluation of your work on numbers and nickels, like Rick Warren talks about, if you base it on numbers and nickels, you're going to be disappointed, because the Spirit didn't base it on numbers and acts. There were numbers, but it was the result of God giving the increase. And the idea of just simply doing the work, being able to be challenged. Don't compare yourself to everybody's Instagram church pictures. Everybody, they're doing it better over there. Well, there are some things to learn, but every situation is different. You have to be adaptable and be the servant for the group that you're with now. But I'm also not unaware that there may be a time to move. If folks aren't listening to you, if there is a tenuous relationship that's not going to be solved, sometimes you do have to move. Good friends of mine have been heartbroken, both in this region and across the nation, who have just been gutted by churches, and it's not something to be done lightly. Me staying here wasn't done lightly through the years. Those decisions. But also, there will be a time that you have to shake the dust off and move on, as much as that's going to hurt.
What would you say to churches from the other side about maybe how to make that work to keep a guy around for 31 years?
Well, I would tell churches what was told to me. The leadership in this church says, we're not asking you to just come up here and to do the work for us. We're partners in the work. We want you to study. We want you to teach. We want you to evangelize. Yes, but we are partners in it. We don't expect you to do all the hospital visits. We don't expect you to do all the Bible class teaching. And I would tell churches to let preachers be a student sometimes. Leaders in churches need to teach and be shepherds out in front. And it's not always supposed to be the guy that you pay. He needs to be fed. And they have allowed me to grow in ways. They have asked good questions about some of the things that I wanted to do, both personally and as a congregation. But I would say the golden rule is never wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
No great pearls of wisdom there. I mean, it's really, it can be simple, Terry. It can be simple.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those areas where probably simpler is better, and I think that's one of our problems is we've so complicated the process and the relationship, and we've adapted models from other areas of our life rather than just following the simple pattern and principles of the New Testament and how we're supposed to do this. And I think one of the things I would say, especially to add on to what you said, maybe clarify, that church that's hired the mid-20s preacher, you need to have a much more patient approach than you would if you had me or Mark Russell there. And you need to give him time for personal study and growth. And one of those things to have, by the way, that I think especially churches need to have, and I think Vale had this, but I think that they have benefited from it, is they had a kind of a kingdom view of you. And what I mean by that is they knew that part of their role, especially early on, was allowing you to grow and allowing you to mature, so that even if it wasn't at Vale, that wherever Mark Russell went, he had matured enough to glorify God in the kingdom and to do the work in the kingdom. And I think some churches forget that aspect in regards, especially to younger men, that it's a much more self-centered view about what you can do for our local body rather than what's being done for the entire kingdom. And I think that's something that gets lost in these kind of equations as well. We've almost gone for an hour, and I know it doesn't seem like that, but I really have enjoyed it. And what's funny is we've kept a lot of listeners, and that's been great. And I really enjoyed it. Thanks for sharing your time. For those who don't know, Mark and I have a special relationship. We end every call the same way. There's a reason for that. We talked one day about how we got tired of hearing everybody say, the Bible says I have to love you, but it doesn't say I have to like you. And I think in one of those conversations, by the way, there was something about the fact that we understood why some people said that. But the difference was that despite Mark's terrible taste in sports teams, that I love him and I like him. And we say that every time we talk. And so, Mark, we're going to wrap up like you and I wrap up all of our conversations, brother. I love and like you. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, despite your affinity for prison garb, I love and like you too.
And there it was.
Take care, brother.
Take care. Thank you for joining us. Those that joined us, thank you so much. And look forward to next week. Phil will be back with us. He'll be back in country. And so just stay tuned for what that is. If you have anything you'd like us to cover in a future broadcast, make sure to send us a message. Y'all have a great day. Serve God. Thank you for joining us again. Bye-bye.